How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
The Green Notebook, carried by military leaders around the world. Within those pages are sweat, tears, triumphs, and the hard-won lessons of life. Lessons worth sharing. Each week, the team dives into the notebooks of military leaders, business professionals, authors, athletes and coaches, and entertainers to share lessons and help you lead with the best version of yourself.
Hey, it's Joe here, and every morning before I crack open a book or sit down to do some writing, the first thing I do is brew an amazing cup of Alpha coffee. They make premium 100% Arabica coffee, and Alpha has some of my favorite blends. They have Dawn Patrol, which is a nice medium light breakfast blend. I also enjoy Charlie Don't Surf, which is a medium Kona blend. And I even get to take Alpha coffee to work with me because they also make K-Cups. Not only do they have great coffee, they're a great veteran-owned business who has shipped over 20,000 bags of coffee to deployed troops. They also offer a 10% discount to members of the military and first responders. And Alpha Coffee has been an awesome company to partner with at From the Green Notebook. So taste the Alpha difference and purchase their coffee today at www.alpha.coffee or via Amazon Prime. Welcome to another episode of From the Green Notebook. I'm your host, Joe Byerly, and this week we're diving into the notebook of retired United States Marine Corps General Anthony Zinni. In this episode, General Zinni shares lessons from over 4 decades of military and public service, which began as a lieutenant in Vietnam, included a tour as a CENTCOM commander, and he finished off as a special envoy in the Middle East. He's a modern-day icon, and it was an honor to sit down with him. There's so many lessons in this episode that I encourage you to listen to this one in its entirety. He's a great storyteller, so trust me, the stories alone make it worth it. So please welcome to the show, General Anthony Zinni.
Thank you, Joe. Good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
My generation, as a lieutenant, I started off patrolling the streets of Iraq as a platoon leader. Just like your generation, started out doing something very similar in Vietnam. So I am very excited today to get your perspective and the lessons you learned throughout your career. But before we get into my questions, could you just provide our listeners with your background for a few minutes?
Well, I joined the Marines my first day on campus at Villanova, 1961, Marine platoon leader course. Went away in the summers in between, college terms, and on graduation in 1965, was commissioned as second lieutenant. Went to our basic school. At that time, Marines started going into Vietnam big time, 2 divisions, and I was made an infantry officer. I went to the 2nd Marine Division. From there, platoon commander, company commander, our infantry training center. We trained new recruits in infantry skills. Then I went to Vietnam on my first tour as an advisor, Vietnamese Marines. We wore their uniforms. I went to language school, went to Army Special Warfare School at Bragg, did a tour there with the Vietnamese Marines, which was interesting. Hardly ever saw another American. Came back, was an instructor at our basic school, second lieutenants, and into scouting and patrolling and counterinsurgency, counter-guerrilla operations. Back to Vietnam as a company commander, was wounded, ended up in Okinawa, finishing out my tour. Went on to 2nd Marine Division, commanded a couple of more companies. I had 7 companies total, 3 rifle companies, a headquarters and service company, a bulk fuel company, a guard company. It was a benefit of spending so long as a captain, when we got sort of frozen in rank. We made captain pretty quickly, but we stayed there for a long time.
That sounds like so much fun.
Yeah, I didn't want to leave. Went on to staff tours, came back, into the 2nd Marine Division. I was a S3 executive officer, battalion commander, did another headquarters tour, went back as a battalion commander, was a regimental commander, strategic studies group for the Chief of Naval Operations, spent a tour in European Command when I first was a general officer, and as a deputy J3, went to the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, and after that, Deputy Commander CENTCOM, then CENTCOM. Did all the schools, our career level schools, our Command and Staff College, National War College, and several other courses. My combat tours were 2 in Vietnam, 3 in Somalia, Iraq, and a couple other smaller operations elsewhere in the world. I retired in 2000, pursued 3 careers, one in the corporate world, which was compensation was good, was interesting. I've managed to accumulate 4 degrees, a bachelor's degree in economics, 3 master's degrees, one in international relations, one in business, and one in negotiation and mediation, and then a doctorate in education. So I was applying my business experience, undergraduate in the corporate world, ended up being CEO and chairman of the board of a defense company, and served in several other business worlds. My second, post-retirement career was as a peace mediator. I did 12 peace mediation efforts for State Department, presidential missions like the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations and several others. Third career was as a professor, and had 9 chairs at different universities. And that kind of takes me up to where I am now.
And would you say your current career, I guess, is a grandfather? Is that
7
full-time?
times over? And I want to tout the benefit of having grandkids, because they are my tech support team. And for those that are technologically handicapped, it's great to have a lot of great grandkids who can fix things for you.
That's great. See, you're already delving out advice 2 minutes into the podcast. I want to go back as I was listening to your career, just the wealth of experience you had. I mean, you started out in Vietnam. That's where you cut your teeth as a leader. I'm curious, how did that experience shape you as a leader, not just at the tactical level, but also as a strategic level, as you were, the CENTCOM leader, and like you said, you were doing peace mediations in your 2nd, 3rd, or 4th career?
Well, my first tour, I think, affected me a great deal, because the Vietnamese Marines, like the Vietnamese Airborne, were their national strike force. So we went all over Vietnam. So we got to see everything from the DMZ to the Delta. They were small units. They were basically light infantry. There weren't a lot of them. There were just 5 battalions, small battalions. I hardly ever saw another American. They had a quartering act in Vietnam, so you moved into the villages. So when we were on operations, we were living in villages with the people in the houses. When we operated like in jungle areas along the Cambodian border and elsewhere, they didn't have MREs or C rations in those days. We kind of lived off the economy and the land, and forage for our food. So it was a whole different experience. When I came back, and I was the only 2nd lieutenant ever assigned to the Marine Advisory Unit, because they had so many casualties and requirements in the north. The billet I was filling actually was supposed to be a senior captain. We had 2 Americans to a battalion, and the senior American always stayed with the battalion commander. So I was always out on patrol with a company or platoon or whatever. But I saw the war through the eyes of the people. So when I got back, I thought maybe my peers who had gone off to the divisions, and of course I was to go there later as an infantry company commander in 1st Marine Division. But when we talked about the war, like I came back to our basic school, as I said, and I was teaching in the tactics department, and I was listening to their version of the war. I said, that's not the war I saw. And I began to realize, of course, after my 2nd tour, even more so, they saw the war from inside an American unit looking out. Their connection with the people, and even, of course, my counterparts were Vietnamese, officers and NCOs and troops. I saw a different war. It made me realize that there's a cultural aspect to war, and there's a view from the population that you don't normally get. And it gave me a greater appreciation for what the war was all about and what it would take to prevail in that kind of environment. And I began to see clearly the mistakes we were making in Vietnam. One was we were supporting a government that the people didn't really support, even those that wanted to be free and didn't want to be dominated by a communist regime. But they were looking at Saigon and looking at rotating generals at one coup after another. I had one incident in a village. I had moved in with the village chief, a very nice family. And it was a small village up in what was central highlands. And the mother of the family fixed me dinner. And she asked me, why are you here? She asked if I had a picture of my family, and I had just been married before I went over there. And I showed her a picture of my wife and I in front of my in-laws' house. And she said, I don't understand why you're here. And I tried to explain to her, we want to support you to be free and all this other stuff. And she looked at me and she pointed south towards Saigon and she said, well, what are you going to do about them? And I thought she had her directions wrong. I pointed north to Hanoi. I said, you mean them? That's what we're going to change. She said, no. Then she said something to me that always stuck with me. She said, what am I supposed to die for? She said, we have seen war with the Japanese and the French, French Indochina War, now the American War, as they called it, 30 years of war. And she had a young son who was like preteen. And she said, what is my son supposed to die for? And I've thought about that. You could fast forward to Afghanistan and Iraq. By the way, I did an assessment in each place after I retired for General Odierno in Iraq and for General Madison Allen in Afghanistan. But that question always came back and haunted me. If we are not making the conditions better, governance systems, building institutions, and we're not credible in that, and they don't see something really to die for. Even my brother Vietnamese Marine officers, they were fighting like hell and they wanted to be free, but they didn't like their government. They were upset with these coup generals that, big men, little men, QT. They knew that eventually that couldn't be something that the people were willing to die for. The second thing that I took away, and this was more from my Vietnamese Marine officers and buddies, the frustration of a sanctuary. North Vietnam, the Cambodia and Laotian borders were sanctuaries. We would fight like hell, and the Vietnamese Marines, like the Vietnamese Airborne, were their elite units. They fought really well. They were very courageous, took a lot of casualties. And you defeat an enemy, and they would just retreat back across a border, refit, rearm, and come back. I saw the same thing in Afghanistan, with Pakistan served that purpose. And I looked at the government in Kabul, and I said, I saw this movie. I go back to World War II. I think about what we did in Germany and Japan and rebuilding governments and ensuring they were non-corrupt, rebuilding institutions. The whole business of nation building struck me as if you're not building institutions and the people aren't investing in those institutions, whether they're governance systems, economic systems, social systems, whatever, you're not winning. And you can't fool yourself to say, oh, we opened up a little girls' school over here. But, I'm not putting that down. It's all great. But our metrics, we were fooling ourselves with our metrics. And so the worst thing that happened, and I almost choked when I read it, was the resurrection of coin doctrine in Afghanistan. I almost had a heart attack reading that. I said, my God, we're bringing that out. We think that's good. But that was to suffice for a strategy that wasn't there. We were trying to make one up. I don't think anybody understood what it took to build a nation and to change it from a middle-aged society and culture into something, we tout the free market economy, Jeffersonian democracy, all well and good, Jefferson, Locke, Rousseau, three dead white guys, as far as the people are concerned.
Just listening to you, and how your experience in Vietnam, just shaped your outlook. Again, I think back to my own experiences patrolling the streets of Diyala province and even most recently working for General Scott Miller in Afghanistan and seeing that everything that we did military operationally, he wanted it to contribute to a political settlement. If it didn't equate to that, then that's something that we didn't waste time, money, or resources on. And I would love to get in this discussion with you, sir, but the fact that I'm still in uniform, I should go ahead right now and probably...
Yeah, just answer questions. You don't have to.
Probably change topics. So, because this is a leadership podcast, and we'll have another discussion after this, as you moved up from a tactical level leader up to an operational, organizational leader, how did your leadership evolve? How did it change over the decades of your career?
As a young officer, at the tactical level, if you would have asked me then, what is the operational level? What is the strategic level? I sort of had in my mind, It's just the next level is just the current level on steroids. Like you move from the tactical to the operational, there's more things to learn, there's more things to incorporate into how you do business. What I found at each level, it was way more than that. You had to expand into very different worlds that you weren't used to. It wasn't sort of a progressive scaling up. It required bringing in much more other factors that you didn't anticipate. As a CENTCOM commander, I realized that I had to understand cultures. I had to understand economic systems, particularly in that part of the world, energy and the production and distribution. I was deeply involved on the political side several times while I was the CENTCOM commander. I was sent off by President Clinton on a couple of diplomatic missions. So, as I rose to the operational level from the tactical level, I was now, and of course, that was at a time when we were discovering jointness. So you were now learning other service capabilities, other service contributions and skill sets, and you're having to bring those in. At the tactical level, I thought, well, it's kind of combined arms, but now it was more than combined arms. You're bringing in entirely different dimensions within the military context. Then at the strategic level, you're stretching out to the economic, diplomatic, and informational and other areas or other elements of power. The agencies you're dealing with now go beyond the Department of Defense and all come into your world, and you affect it and control it, and in some ways have to complement it in some ways. So it's that level of expansion. I found the same thing in the corporate world. I found that the most effective leader development programs, and I did a lot of work on consulting on building leader development programs in some businesses. You have to do it at three levels. There's an entry level, there's a mid-level management, and then there's an executive level. And I taught executive leadership in several graduate courses at different universities too. But they sort of had a parallel kind of three-layer development required. And you can't sort of take entry-level understanding of leadership and just think you maybe polish it a little bit and move it up. You've got to expand it greatly, laterally, because there are so many other things that come into that. Much like in our world, in the military, you grow up in an MOS, you then start to work with other MOSs and capabilities, and eventually you're working with other agencies and other dimensions beyond the military. The same thing happens in the corporate world. The company I led had 55,000 employees in 38 states and 6 countries. And, you have everything from engineers to marketeers and everything else. And how do you develop a potential, say, engineer who's got a very specific job, a very specific skill set, but has the potential to become a CEO? You've got to make sure he, much like we do in the military, gets a broad base of experiences, gets a tour in finance, tour in marketing, that you've got to grow him or her. And it has to be through some process where at each level there is a piece of experiences, reflective experiences, and education that have to be added at each level, exposing them to this increasing number of dimensions they have to deal with.
And that's a question I have. You were talking about a CENTCOM commander. You're now concerned with like economic policies. You're now concerned with international relations. And I would argue that the professional military education system probably hasn't changed that much from the time that you came through to what I've experienced recently. And so I'm curious, how did you augment what was taught to you to have a much better understanding to allow you to lead at a strategic level?
Well, the first thing was pursuing education beyond the military. Like I said, I went through all the career level, command and staff level, top level school, and courses in a charm school for brigadier generals and 2-star courses and all that, all well and good. But I really felt I wanted to increase my civilian education. And it was not to be, in my mind, military. In other words, getting a degree in military science or history, focusing on military history or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that, don't get me wrong. But my bachelor's degree was in economics. And so I did a lot of this off-duty education, if you will, and some that was partial residence, partially online. But international relations was important to me. I could see that was going to become a major factor. And I didn't want to just read about it or take courses, because I think a degree course disciplines you. You're headed towards something. The degree requirements force you to be serious about it and meet the requirements. I did one in business, again, because even in the military, when you grow up, there's aspects of financial management and business related subjects that apply to anyone. As you go further up the chain, you get more involved in things that are important. In effect, we market. In effect, we run budgets and everything else. And that was important. I found myself getting more and more involved in diplomatic missions, even while on active duty. And then afterwards for State Department and for, I wouldn't say a work trip, but I worked with an NGO, the Henri Dunant Center in Geneva, on several missions. A couple of those the State Department asked me to do as a private citizen. So I got a degree in mediation and negotiation, dispute resolution, which is a fascinating science. And then my doctorate in education, my focus was on interdisciplinary leadership. And I was teaching courses on leadership. My publisher was after me to write a book on it. So I wanted to stay abreast of what is the latest leadership theories. How are we thinking about leadership? My focus and my thesis was on organizational innovation. How do successful organizations, military and the corporate world, successfully innovate? Why do attempts at innovation fail? And so that was something that was really, I felt, relevant to what I was doing and what I was fascinated in. So I sort of ran those tracks along with my military career. And then after my military career ended and I retired, I got into those tracks, into the business world, into the mediation world, into education.
It's fascinating. I've heard different people give different answers to that, as they've gone up, and a lot of people just haven't had the opportunity or even made time to pursue outside education as they were coming up because of deployments and demands. And so what I've found with a lot of people, including myself, is that, just grabbing a wide swath of books off the library shelf or at Amazon is sometimes like the best way to do it if I don't have the opportunity to get away at school.
I'm an avid reader. I should say reader and listener. I always keep a audio book in my car, so I think you hit the key is finding time. When you have time where you could be learning something, figure out how best to do it. I mean, the audio books are a great way. So my driving turns into an education, if you will, a learning period. So I try as much as possible, my approach to keeping a couple books going at the same time, some reading, some listening, but maximizing the snippets of time you have out there.
Oh, I love that you just said that. I just wrote something the other day. Last couple months, I've been gone on a deployment, and I had a routine before that where woke up at 4:00 every morning, read for 30, 35 minutes, and then went off to work. And then I left. And so I'm overseas. You know how it goes. Like, time is no longer your own, working crazy hours. There's no privacy. There's no alone time. There's no quiet time. And so I came across this idea of time confetti, which is like these little snippets of time throughout the day. And so I was reading, like if there was riding on a Black Hawk to go do a battlefield circulation, there's a 20-minute Black Hawk ride, I would read for 20 minutes. Or, if right before I went to sleep, I'd read for 5 minutes. And so what I found is just in that 2-month period, I was able to, finish 2 or 3 books. But I wouldn't have done that if I was trying to find these large chunks of time or, wait till I got a morning routine. Because as you know, when you're deployed, routine is very hard to do.
Yeah, you got to grab the time when you can and take the moments. Obviously we have obligations on our profession and obligations to a family and all the things that go with that. So it's you got to squeeze it in where you can get the time.
And we've covered one, facet of development, which is that reading. And, there's another facet, which is mentorship and learning from others. So I'm curious, throughout your military career, who were a couple people that you learned from that really shaped how you looked at leadership? And then, what were those lessons that you took away from that?
Well, I would say, as a new lieutenant with my first platoon and then company executive officer, I had a company commander that I was amazed at when he spoke, how everybody stopped and listened. and deferred to him. And he was a captain, but we would, I can remember one time we were the aggressors on a division exercise, and when he was giving his evaluation, I'm watching the generals listening to him and the colonels and deferring to him. Everywhere we went, he seemed to, as he stood up or he spoke, everything stopped. He was an abrasive guy. He did not have the greatest personality in the world. He tended to be a little bit maybe arrogant and pushy and blunt. And so one time I got up enough courage to ask him, I said, sir, I watch you, and when you speak, everybody stops and freezes and listens. I mean, you're the expert on everything. And I said, and forgive me for saying this, it's not because they like you, And so, and he laughed because we were pretty close, so I could say that to him. His office, he had, as you would expect, like an officer like that, he had bookshelves lining his entire office. And he says, see those books? All those books, all those FMs, all those FMs, as we call them in the Marine Corps. And he said, I know what's in every one of those. He said, if you want respect, make sure you know what you're doing. Your competence is the key. And that stuck with me because I saw the respect he had because of how much he knew, how much he had educated himself, and how much he knew about his profession. And then fast forward, when I came back from my second tour in Vietnam, I ran a school at our 2nd Marine Division, and it was a school teaching advanced infantry tactics and special operations. And special operations had a different meaning than it does today. It was environmental operations like cold weather, desert, jungle, and mountain operations. So we had all the equipment and all that. We taught all that. I also ran a squad leaders course. So most of during Vietnam, a lot of our NCOs did not have a chance to go to school. So they got promoted to corporals and sergeants and, turned right around, put out in Vietnam. They didn't have the structured schooling, but they had a hell of a lot of battlefield experience. So we were now sort of backfilling on the schooling. So part of my job was their MOS, just meaning infantry skills, and really training them up on leadership and infantry skills. And with all the Vietnam returnees now, these are NCOs that had served and were squad leaders and maybe platoon sergeants. I would do a survey when they first came in. And one of the questions I asked right off, I said, think about your lieutenant in your platoon. And I said, we've been through some basic leadership, understanding leadership principles and traits. I said, you can only pick one trait as the number one trait you want in your officer. I know there's a lot of them, and I know you expect them to have them, but I want the one number one trait. I think it was like 98 point something percent. And these were, I put through quite a few of them. In one way or another, express competence. I want my lieutenant to know his stuff. Now, they didn't say stuff. There was another word they used.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, but to me, it was when the crunch comes, I want that officer to be competent enough to accomplish the mission and get us through this thing, out the other end. And that rose to the top. Interestingly enough, I followed up on that later on, asking that question, not only within the military context, but even afterwards when I was working in companies and building leadership programs. I found when there was a company under stress, when things weren't going well, and I asked that question, that was the trait that came out. But when things were good, peacetime military, things are going pretty good, basically having young leaders who hadn't really had combat experience or gone through a crisis in the business world, you would get answers like, I expect them to be caring and receptive and approachable, all good traits, don't get me wrong. But it was interesting how competence suddenly in times of stress and crisis, boom, number one. And so that always registered with me that the first thing you have to be, it's great to be a good old guy and everybody loves you, but it does not replace in the end when you've got to lead it through a crisis or a change or stress or combat as we know it. It's competence that comes out number one.
I'm curious because you strike me as a very curious person. Like, have you explored why that is? Why, when the going gets tough, when everything starts breaking down, the one trait everybody looks to is is to have somebody competent at the helm?
I think there's two reasons for it. I think one is they want you to get us out of this. They want to come out of this and be successful. In our terms in the military, we want to accomplish the mission we're given. In the business world, when things are tough and there's a crisis or business isn't that good, we want to come out of this. We want to start, get into the black again and start being a successful company. The second thing is personal. I mean, for people in the military, we're in life and death situations. I want to succeed and accomplish the mission. I want to come out the other end, alive. And so my ability to understand that we're going to be able to accomplish this mission and my ability to come out the other end in one piece is now all dependent on my leader's competency. And I think that focuses them right away in those times of stress. I saw the same thing. Of course, it's not combat, but I was doing some consulting work with companies that were under stress. Something had gone terribly wrong. There's some disaster hits the company, some big lawsuit, the oil rig goes down or something. And I saw the same thing in those environments. That's when real leaders come out. There's a number of, I've been involved in searches for CEOs. I've been on boards of directors where you're looking for a new CEO and you hire a headhunter organization that, proposes, names and all, and it goes out and seeks names. And I found more and more looking for someone who has led an organization through crisis becomes critically important. They look for somebody because it's almost inevitable that you're going to go through something like that. And it's not only a crisis of some disaster, but sometimes it's because the organization has to change. And what I've seen is the effects of change have the same kind of stress on an organization as a crisis. And so going through periods of major change, reorganization, reorientation has the same kind of impact. And then the same kind of leadership expectation comes out of that.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that come to mind as you're talking. I was recently in a discussion with a senior leader, and we were talking about, we were working on the culture of the organization. And one of the first things we talked about was mastering the basics, but that the basics change at each echelon you're at. And so as you were talking earlier, as a platoon leader, there's a certain set of basics. I would imagine as a entry-level manager, there's a certain set of basics that you have to master. Just as you're a senior leader in the military, as you're an executive of an organization, there's a whole nother set of basics that you need to master. And by mastering those basics, that as the situation changes, you're able to quickly adapt to it. But if you're about, paper level thin, talking point thin, so to speak, on those skills, on those things that you need to know, that you won't have that you'll quickly lose the trust of the people that work for you.
I took a different approach at one time because I was looking at leadership from a positive end. What makes good leaders? What's good leadership? And it suddenly dawned on me at one point, let me look at it the other end. Why do leaders fail? And I was collecting up from military experience, from business world, everywhere else. And I found that all failures fall into one of three categories. It's either lack of caring for their people, lack of the ability to connect and to interact effectively, to be approachable. The second was competence. You failed because you couldn't get the job. You were not competent enough to accomplish the job. And the third was conduct, personal conduct. And so every failure I was seeing, it was a failure in ethics and values and morals. So personal conduct failures. Incompetence, they hadn't developed. They did not grow. They did not have the skills required to meet the requirements of their position. And in caring, they didn't understand the people they led. They didn't understand how to connect to them effectively. Their communication skills were not great. And they were then moved for some reason or outright fired or transferred, as we would think, and giving lesser positions or whatever. But I found those, coming at it from that approach means that you've got to have an effective, I think, personality and characteristics and traits. And sometimes you have to work on it if you're not if your personality is more introverted, not that introverts can't be successful leaders. I don't think there's any set of character traits that limit you in any way. But you and I both know, you find let's say a senior officer that comes down and is able to talk to your troops and your units and really connect to them. And then you find somebody else that feels awkward in that situation, can't really make the connection and the contact, isn't sure what to say. We used to always joke around, here comes the colonel and he's going to ask you how the chow is and all that, the routine, where are you from? Like he's scraping for things to say. So that connection is important. More important now, because what I found, we are more and more diverse, and diversity, there's a lot of forms of diversity, more than we think. I mean, right now, like political diversity and generational diversity have greater lines between them. So being able to connect people, to understand people that you have that represent multicultural aspects that are not, sort of innate experiences that you've had, you've got to work on that. I mean, you've got to understand how to make those connections. Every leadership lecture I give, I start out not by talking about leaders and leadership. I talk about what I call the lead. Who are we leading today? Do you know who you're leading? Do you know what these generations are? Do you know what the ethnic and religious and sexual orientation, all these differences? Do you know the differences in political beliefs or philosophies? Do you know from Gen Y and Gen X and, millennials, do you know what makes them different and why they respond differently? It's one thing to invest in everything you need to know about your job and the skills required to get that job. But from a leading people perspective, you got to understand, what is this that I lead? So I always begin with that. Let's go to the lead. Who are you leading today out there?
I love that. And what I love even more is that, I sent you all these questions we were going to discuss prior to, and I don't even want to ask those anymore. I just, the conversation's going so well. And that's when I really started having fun with the interview. Again, one of my previous bosses always said, start with the red pen. When you're talking about the enemy, start with the enemy first, and then you plan your operations back from there about how you're going to affect that. But what you just said, the light bulb just clicked. Like, start with the people you're leading first, like, who are they? And then, as you develop your vision, as you develop, the ideas behind where you want the organization to go, then you can actually start taking the organization with you. But you're absolutely right. I've been in so many different units over the years where exactly that, like, we were scared when the higher level boss came down to check on training, because we knew it was going to be the same thing every time, and not somebody that was kind of out there, wanting to understand and wanting to communicate with the formation.
I think there's another aspect to this too. We come into our positions understanding, all right, I'm the platoon commander, I'm the company commander, I'm the battalion commander. I understand what that role is. Sometimes you don't know the role you play in that person's life. This hit me as a company commander. My company, we were deploying to the Mediterranean. Our ship had just pulled out of Morehead City, North Carolina. And I had just come out from, evening meal. I was out on the deck. It was great, great evening, sun going down. And one of my Marines was, by the railing. He was a great Marine, young. We had just meritoriously promoted him to Lance Corporal. He came from the inner city, had a terrible family life, was really trying to make something of himself. He had great potential as a leader. And I walked up to him and we started talking. And I said, I'm really proud of you and everything you've accomplished and everything you've done here. And, you have really stood out as a leader. And so I'm talking to him as a company commander, to one of my potential squad leaders here, fire team leader, to be a squad leader. And he turned to me and he looked at me and he said, Captain, you're the closest thing I have to a father in this world. And it just knocked me back. And all that evening, I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about this relationship that I want to work, officer to senior or a young enlisted leader, potential NCO. I'm sure he's going to be a corporal. And I'm thinking of that sort of professional relationship, but, it's important. We try to connect on a personal basis. Then I'm thinking, in his mind, I'm a father figure to him. And I thought, well, what does that mean? I may be missing roles that the people I'm supposed to lead have an expectation for me to fill. And I've got to think about that. I've got to think, not everybody may feel that way, but it made me realize that you may fill a role in the lives of the people you lead that are beyond just your professional connection, your job connection, and your professional responsibilities. And so you got to be prepared to step up for that. You know as well as I do that oftentimes you have somebody that wants to talk to you, and it goes beyond just the military aspects of your relationship. They're looking for advice. They're looking for encouragement. They're looking, to get something off their chest. And then you got to move into another role. I mean, I've even had the case where I'm administering non-judicial punishment on one of my troops, and it turns around that he's now has issues and problems, and he wants to talk about these things. And now I'm not the company commander, battalion commander administrating non-judicial punishment in some way. I now become the big brother or the father in some respects that he needs at that moment. So leadership can take you outside what the job description is, and you got to understand that too, and how you're going to handle that relationship.
Yeah, and I think too, it's also about understanding your impact. Like you may have an off day, somebody messes up, and you make some off-colored comment to them about their performance that in your mind wasn't even a blip on your radar for that day or that week. But that's like the one comment that person just kind of holds on to because how they view you as a leader, and then just end up kind of just holding on to that when you didn't even, like I said, it didn't even register with you that you just made a negative comment towards somebody.
I had a mentor once tell me the best thing you could say to someone, and you have to mean it, is I am proud of you. Because he said, you will not realize how much that means to that individual. I'm proud of you isn't much of a way of dialogue or conversation, but he said those words can be tremendously impactful. And so from you as the commanding officer, as the officer in charge or whatever, when you say that to somebody, what you're conveying is extremely powerful. And that stuck with me. And I found out and you can't just use it to say to everyone, obviously. You've got to mean it. It's got to be justified in some way. But I have found when just saying those words, the response and the reaction that you could see in someone is pretty strong, very strong. I mean, that is a powerful acknowledgement by your leader.
Yeah, I remember when I was a second lieutenant, my very first assignment, I did something that I didn't realize was like, I exhibited moral courage in an event, and I didn't realize I was even doing it. And I came back to the office later that day, and what had happened had gotten back to the battalion commander. And I came back, and there was a note just sitting on my computer from him, and I opened it up, and I believe like that was the first couple lines of the note, like, I'm proud of you. Mm-hmm. And it's still sitting, in my binder today, 18 years later, because you're absolutely right. Like that had such a powerful impact on me. And that probably took him 2 to 3 minutes to just sit down and jam out. And then, he probably doesn't even remember it if I asked him about it today.
I go to this thing about mentorship. The first battalion I checked into, the battalion commander had us lieutenants check in with the sergeant major. The sergeant major was a World War II veteran. He had made 3 island campaigns. This guy had more stripes and service records and ribbons and badges and everything else. A tough old guy, and he was giving us sort of as young lieutenants, giving us advice and things that he had seen from his experience level, things that make lieutenants successful, things to look out for. Little sage advice about, the Marines and how to handle them. One other piece of advice he said is, I know what you all go through your training to come here, and the first thing you're going to do is grab the service record book of every Marine in your platoon, and you're going to go through them, and you're going to come to page 12. Now, page 12 in our old record books was all the NJPs and, any disciplinary action. He said, now, when you hit page 12, you're going to find Marines that have maybe 2 or 3 office hours, as we call them, at NJP in the Marine Corps. You're going to have 2 or 3 office hours, maybe been counseled or whatever. He said, remember one thing. A good Marine's going to have a couple of those in his page 12, or he wouldn't be a good Marine.
That's great advice.
They raise hell. Now, if he didn't kill anybody, didn't break anything, you might have to clean him up, get him squared away and counsel him and do what you got to do. But don't write someone off. And to me, that was kind of a refreshing thing, because it gave me the confidence. When I had a Marine that got in trouble for some reason, you take care of the problem, the right punishment, you counsel him, you work with him. But if he's learned from it and he's moved on, don't let it kill him for the rest of his life. I think the one problem I have now is this zero defects mentality, which it grew up in the Marine Corps where as a young officer, where that wasn't there. If you didn't commit a felony, we'll figure it out, but doesn't happen anymore. Everything is a killer.
Yeah. When we mess up, there's like three things that can happen. One, it can destroy us. Two, it can define us. That's the identity we carry around with us. Or three, it can develop us, just like you were saying, that we mess up and we learn from it. I'm curious, as a young officer, you had these NCOs that were able to speak truth to power to you to kind of help you along. How important was it as you moved up in rank and position? You put 4 stars on your collar. How important was it to have those type of people around you, even as a general officer?
I think you got to create the atmosphere, and the more senior you get, the harder it is to do. You got to create an atmosphere where someone can come to you and, as you say, truth to power, but tell it like it is and feel confident that they aren't going to be penalized for doing that or punished or looked down on. Nobody likes to get bad news, but you need to get it if it's there and to deal with it. So in my mind, I have to create the right kind of atmosphere. I've got to demonstrate on a day-to-day basis that I'm open to that. And I don't kill the messenger. The idea is if you're coming to me with that, I appreciate the fact that you have enough trust and confidence in yourself to be able, and trust in me to come with that, and we'll take care of the problem. We'll do it in some ways. As a battalion commander, as a regimental commander, as a Marine Expeditionary Force commander, CENTCOM commander, I always tried to encourage my sergeants major to make sure I get to spend time with the staff NCOs and NCOs and with the troops, carve the time out of my schedule, convince them that in that moment when we're there, that I want to hear from them. I want to hear what they're doing. And I had, for example, at CENTCOM, I had 2 great sergeants major, both went on to be sergeant major of the Army, both of them. And they were good about it. The sergeant major would come to me and say, "Sir, you're going to have lunch today with a bunch of staff NCOs from each of the services, because Joint Command, or tomorrow you're going out and visit this unit." And I put aside a couple of representative troops from the unit, and we're going to sit down and talk to them. Or he'd come to me and say, "This is the latest thing that troops are talking about, or issues or concerns. And I got enough troops together that, are willing to tell you how they feel and everything." And he would be there saying, "Okay, now there's the general. Go ahead. He'll listen to you now." So I needed him to give them confidence too, that this is okay to do. If there's something that's not right, or something you have a question about, you've got to know. I go back to what I said before about being approachable in this sort of thing. And sometimes you got to create that atmosphere down through the ranks so that everybody feels confident enough that they're not going to be punished for bringing you bad news or expressing something that could make the command better.
So do you think that's like an important thing for leaders to do when they go into the positions, is to go in clear-eyed, knowing that just by nature of the job, that people are going to try to polish the message, that, what you're going to get may not necessarily be reality on the ground. And I don't know that it's necessarily, people being deviant or whatever. I just think that a lot of it's just human nature. Like we want to do well. We want to present the boss with something nice. And that's not life.
It's interesting what you change when you come into command, because sometimes you change things based on your own personality and the way you do business. When I took over a regiment in Okinawa, my first day after the change of command, I see my battalion commanders are standing outside my office. So I got my sergeant major, before I did anything, I said to him, "Why are the battalion commanders standing outside my office?" He said, "Sir, your predecessor had the battalion commanders come in every morning with the logbook, and any Marine that was in the logbook, for having done something, they have to explain it to the regimental commander. So I said, what? Why? What do they explain it to me? Well, if a Marine came in after midnight, through the main gate, I said, well, is that an offense? No, it means he's been out in town, he's been at a bar or whatever. I got it. I understand what Marines do. But what did he do wrong? Well, or if he did something wrong, if he lit his hair on fire and became famous, is it something I should know about? Is he getting NJP at my level or anything? No. So I brought the battalion commanders in and I said, what the hell's going on? I said, look, you're battalion commanders. You have NJP authority. If it's serious enough, it needs to come to my level, fine. I don't need to see you every morning. Take care of it. And one of the battalion commanders I had known before, he had been a lieutenant in one of my companies. And he came up to me afterwards. He said, you don't know how many points you've made with the battalion commanders, but it's just common sense. What the hell am I seeing? What is this supposed to intimidate the battalion commanders? They were busting their butts. Like they were great officers. They're working hard. Yeah, somebody in your unit is going to become famous, one night out in town, and you're going to have to deal with it. And maybe it's at your level or some other level. Maybe it's your company commander that has to deal with it. But what the hell are we doing? Why are we doing this? It doesn't make sense. It's interesting to go through when you take command and look at what's been done. These are small things, but when I first sat down as a MEF commander, Marine Expeditionary Force, kind of equivalent to a corps level, I suddenly, the first day, I see this stack of letters to sign that says there will be quiet hours between these hours and these hours throughout, the Camp Pendleton. So I said, what are these quiet hours? And then they told me, well, when there's a change of command or there's a change of sergeant's major, whatever, in a formation, the quiet hours mean that the helicopters can't fly, our fixed wing can't fly, there can't be any, artillery shooting or whatever. I said, why? I don't get it. That's training. That's what we're supposed to do. I said, screw these quiet hours. If it's interfering with the damn speech that the colonel's given, he stops his speech till it's over. And I said, by the way, I don't like these long changes of command. You get out there, you get the colors, you pass it, you say thank you. The other guy says great job, and he leaves. That's it. Get on with training. So the next request I get is, does this apply to your house? Because at Camp Pendleton, I had this place called the Ranch House. It was the old governor of California's house, beautiful, stables and everything else. And right next to us was the air station, where we had our helicopters and small fixed wing and everything. And they were told they had to fly around my house because this was a no-fly area. What's a BS? The squadron commander came to me and says, well, sir, we make noise even late at night. I said, I don't care. That's if you're training, man. Don't worry about it. So small things like that send the wrong messages out, and what is the priority here? And the priority is training. That comes first, everything else comes second. And I said, I got to set the example. My change of command was done outside with one platoon, no pass and review, nothing. They stood there, they read the orders. I received the colors. And when I left the command, I did the same thing.
That's great. And I think I read an article from the Marine Corps Gazette, and I think it was actually in the late 70s. There was a line in there that just really stuck out to me, that leadership is communication. Yeah. And so as I hear you tell those stories, you were communicating by coming in and making those small changes. You were actually communicating very loudly your approach to being a leader and what you valued.
It's funny you say communications, because as a battalion commander, I walked into the battalion headquarters, right after the change of command, and I noticed there was a huge bulletin board, and it was right outside the sergeant major's office. And this bulletin board, I'm reading it, and it's got a lot of very useful information for the troops. So then I'm thinking, how many troops come wandering through the battalion CP? How many troops would stop in front of the sergeant major's office to read this stuff? I doubt
Exactly.
Not too many, right?
Exactly.
So if this is the way we're communicating to the troops, something's wrong. There has to be a better way. And I actually started this when I was a battalion executive officer. And what got me is I was listening to the battalion commander at the time, great guy. he would have these company commander, staff officer meetings, and he would put this stuff out. I mean, he was great at he was very specific about direction and everything. And I was watching the company commanders, and I'd watch them sit there and listen. Every once in a while, they might take a note. They'd listen, take a note. And I'm wondering how much of this is getting down to that last PFC in the ranks, because this is our way of communicating. And the first filter it's going through is these captains. Now, I didn't know if that captain went back and had a formation, could remember it all, took some notes. Maybe he just had his platoon commanders in and said, this is what we got at the meeting. Maybe the platoon commanders then went to the squad leaders. So, it's the old game, like when you whisper in somebody's ear and they pass it down. How much got down to the last ranks?
Yeah, it's a great lesson about like actually getting out there and communicating in a way that people will remember.
Yeah.
And they will actually resonate. And again, like I've been so fortunate over the last couple of years working for some amazing leaders. And, what I found them to do is that they're never sitting in the office. They're constantly out, constantly walking around and saying the same exact thing over and over and over again. And what I found is that in doing that, all of a sudden, like their message becomes the message of the organization. But like you said, if there's people just sitting in meetings and, throwing out some notes and thinking it's going to get down to the lowest levels of the organization, like it's not. So it takes a conscious effort and a very deliberate effort.
No.
Yes, sir. Well, I'm very conscious of your time. So I'd like to ask two more questions and then
Sure.
We'll wind it down. So the next question is, again, you're a student of leadership. You've been a student of leadership for decades now. And so I'm curious, what are 2 or 3 books that you've found that have greatly influenced your leadership?
There's one book I would recommend to anybody, and it's called Leadership, and it's by a guy named Peter Northouse. Northouse is his name. It's often used as a textbook, but it sort of consolidates all the leadership theories. And Northhouse's book is, I thought, it's not something you're going to sit down by the fire and go through and read. It's something that's like a reference. And so when you'll come to something like adaptive leadership, you'll come to something like in-group leadership. These are different theories of leadership. You'll hear them. He has a great reference for it. He updates it every year. And it's a phenomenal reference book for leadership. So when I wrote my book, what I found in this sort of period of discovering leadership today in the 21st century, one I mentioned to you was you got to understand who you're leading because the diversity is much greater. You got to pay attention to that. There's much more involved in leadership now directed to self-awareness. You really got to know who you are. So all the work done on personality tests, on strength tests and all that, I think there's tremendous value in that. Try to understand yourself. And there's a lot of material out there and things that you go through. I always ask my students, I used to hand out a blank sheet of paper and I told them, I'm going to collect these. You have 15 minutes. I want you to write and answer this one question. Who am I? Write it, answer it. I'm going to collect it. And they look at you like, whoa, what is this? And they'd write 15 minutes. I'd say, okay, stop. Now, I'm not collecting the papers. Put them aside. And I want you now to take out a second piece of paper, which I'm also not going to collect. 15 minutes, write this to you. Ask yourself, who am I? And be honest. I said, be completely honest because no one's going to see it. And so after I would do this, we would talk about the first paper you wrote, since you thought I was going to collect it, you were telling me who you wanted me to believe who you are. The second question, if you're answering it, you're more honest with yourself. And it goes back to all these different perceptions of who we are, self-perception, what we want others to perceive us, maybe who we really are that we don't quite understand. So it's really to get into that. I had one student come to me. He was angry as hell. He wanted to see me after class. I said, okay, come on to my office. I said, what's the matter? Why are you so heated up? He said, because I realized when I was writing the second letter that first letter was pure bullshit. I said, yeah, that's usually the way it is. I'm trying to project something I want you to believe. I'm trying to hide all my flaws and faults. But I would go through, the key to leadership is decision-making, critical thinking, how to do analytical decision making, how to understand recognitional decision making, intuitive decision making, understand the strategic level, operational, tactical levels, and even in business and everything you do in life. Understanding the place for technology. We overvalue technology today and try to use it to replace things that maybe shouldn't be replaced, and maybe we should just use it to improve. Organizational theory. You got to be the master of the organization and don't be a victim of it. Don't just accept it for what it is. How to manage through crisis and change. So all these sorts of things I picked out from running around, looking at military units, business units, government organizations, and everything else, and pulling together what's happening out there right now. What are organizational cultures? How are they built? How are they changed? What are the positive aspects, negative aspects? So to me, it wasn't me just dragging back. Let me tell you, I got 40 years in the military. Some of that applicable, maybe, but that's not what I think is most effective.
This is awesome. This is, I appreciate this one-on-one class on leadership I'm getting. You're faking it and saying it's for a podcast. The final question I have is a lot of our listeners out there are just starting out. They're just starting out in the military. They're just starting out in business or whatever profession that they're on. What advice would you give them as you reflect back on the decades of experience you have?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would tell you is something I just mentioned before. Figure out who you are. Be honest with yourself. Figure out who you are. You can take the personality test, the strength test, and all these things that are out there. Don't try to be something you're not. I've seen the second lieutenants come out and they got a cigar in their mouth and they're trying to look like Clint Eastwood or something. That's not you. That's not you. Yeah, it doesn't matter who you are. You can be a leader.
I did that. I'm going to admit it right now.
We all did that. Come on, I did that. We want to project an image, but be honest with yourself. The second thing, and again, that I talked about, know your stuff. I mean, that you get the greatest respect is built by being the most professionally competent person you can be. So really know your stuff. And the third thing I would say is you lead people. I mean, even though you have things that you're responsible for, it's all about people. Who is that I'm leading? I want to understand who you are. I want to know about you. I know what your expectations are. I want to know why you joined the Army, why you came to this company or whatever, and be open to change and to ideas, but don't be crazy about it. Some people come in and think, I've got to change 52 things while I'm here to leave my legacy or something, and they screw everything up when they do it. I did a whole thing on innovation. I did my thesis on military innovation, and most military organizations get it all wrong and screw it up, creates problems. But basically, at the end of every year, sit down and write everything you learned that year, good and bad, about leadership. This is what I learned because I saw Major so-and-so. He is a great leader. He connects to the troops. He knows his stuff. What did I learn from Major so-and-so? Well, then I saw Captain so-and-so, not so good. Troops hate him. He's an SOB and he doesn't get it. And he screws up a lot. What did I learn? Because you're going to learn from the good and the bad. I've been around some great people. I mean, I worked for Colin Powell. I worked for General Jack Galvin in UCOM, who to me was the finest soldier statesman I ever met, for General Gary Luck in Korea, who was the best operational leader and thinker, for General Al Gray in the Marine Corps that conceptually thought about his service and its uniqueness and what it could give, and built a whole different kind of not only structured but conceptual ways of doing business in the Marine Corps. And then there's a whole series of other people down there that taught me well. I also saw bad examples in the military that taught me what not to do and what to avoid. But collect your ideas and thoughts. It's kind of like your kit bag. We're always adding to our kit bag. We're always finding some other nifty piece of gear.
This was a lot of fun, and I appreciate you making time.
Thanks, Joe.
And I learned a lot. And there's a lot of great lessons in here that I hope a lot of new leaders take away, and then a lot of the junior folks that were coming up when you were in charge are able to rehash some memories listening to it.
Thanks, Joe. Take care.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of From the Green Notebook podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us gain visibility and the opportunity to help more people on their leadership journey. Also, make sure you check out our website at www.fromthegreennotebook.com. There, you can listen to past episodes, read leadership articles written by military leaders from around the world. You can sign up for our monthly reading list email where you can learn about new books that are coming out, and our Sunday reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. Is really short. It's a 2-minute read, but I guarantee you it's going to start your week off on the right foot. Finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter at FTGN Notebook, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for From the Green Notebook. Again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. I am humbled by the opportunity to learn these lessons alongside you. So please join us next week for another episode of From the Green Notebook, where we're going to help you lead with the best version of yourself.
I came from the mud. There's dirt on my hands. Strong.